Imagine you are living in ancient times. The only world you know is the limited surroundings in which you live. You have no knowledge or understanding of the planet as a whole. You spend day to day working to survive. On a bright sunny day, you look up at the sky and you see a black shadow moving across the sun. The sun becomes covered completely, and day turns to night. You have no idea why. You do not know what a solar eclipse is, how it happens, or why it happens. All that you know is your world has been plunged into darkness. People looked for explanations in the only way they knew how. Were the gods angry? Was this a portent of doom? Could it even be a giant monster devouring the sun? Over thousands of years, mankind has used the paranormal to explain events to which they could not find answers. As far-fetched as some explanations seem now, put yourself in their shoes, in their time, and explain why the sun is turning black. In Babylonian times to medieval times and beyond, epileptic fits were often seen as being caused by the person being possessed by an evil spirit. In 1692 in Salem, young girls in the village began to develop fits. The doctors could not work out why this was happening. It was therefore decided that the witches were responsible for casting spells upon the girls. Historians believe that at least some of the girls were faking. Some believed they were suffering from a form of hysteria. But in 1692, there was no known or seemingly rational explanation. And so, with the strength of religious conviction in a society more open to the existence of the paranormal, witchcraft was seen as a logical explanation. The paranormal has long been attributed to things we do not understand. It has provided an apparent explanation when the science and knowledge of the time could not provide answers. We are naturally afraid of the unknown, but at the same time we can be enthralled by it. What we fear both repels and fascinates us. Contemporary folk tales have existed for centuries. No story is spoken or written without the knowledge and experience of the world around us. This includes those things which we fear. Fairy tales, long before the Victorians started rewriting them specifically for children, were for everybody to hear. They were dark, they were sinister, they were designed to thrill and to scare. They could be cautionary tales, or simply tales told to release the adrenaline we experience with fear. These stories naturally reflected events at the time they were written or conceived. This is still true today. Any story is a reflection of what we call the time of production, an important concept which I will discuss shortly. An example of old folk tales reflecting real events can be seen in stories such as Hansel and Gretel, a suggestion that very poor families would send children into the wilderness when they could not afford to feed them. The very notion that the children in the tale are enticed by food, by candy offered by the witch of the story, can be seen as potential reference to such stories. In later fairy tales, some aspects of the story were toned down. For example, the regular character of the evil stepmother. Why stepmother? Because it is too much to imagine a real mother treating her child so badly. The evil stepmother is what we know as the other, part of society, of ourselves, which we cannot face. There is a natural curiosity for the unexplained, the dark and mysterious. Even for the things we fear, we can see the paranormal, whether in life or in fiction. It can provide a safe, apparent removal for what we see as real life. If we experience something which at least appears to be paranormal, it can be exciting. It can be terrifying. It can sometimes lead to the fear affecting someone's life, even their day-to-day routines, especially if they experience a seemingly paranormal event in their own home. There are those who seek to find answers, whether those answers prove the paranormal or provide logical scientific explanations to those occurrences. But there are also those who seek to use that interest, use that fear, provide answers that are theatrical and untrue. Since the Victorian period, tricksters have faked the paranormal and investigators have sought to expose the fraud. This series of 8 episodes of the History of Debunking will take us through the past 2 centuries to see how fake, real, and unknown phenomena is researched. The other. In the late 18th century, philosopher George Hegel was a key influence in the formation of the theory of the other. The starting point of this concept applies to something or someone different from ourselves, something outside of the social norm, and at its extreme, something beyond the science and knowledge of the time. In the early use in philosophy and psychology, it is referring to different cultures and standards in behaviour. The 1800s saw an increase in travel to other countries and continents, to societies very different than those more familiar. It was a chaotic time in history dealing with prejudice and dismissal of newly discovered nations. In the realm of horror, science fiction, and in the paranormal, it is also a generally negative term. In the 20th century, it was appropriated by critical theory in literature and fiction, including film and TV. The other is often presented in the form of a monster, a spirit, or alien. But what is actually being represented in these fictions is a metaphor for our own fears, our fear of the world around us, or events and news, and even the darker side of human nature, including ourselves. The darker side of ourselves can be uncomfortable to look at, so we transform it into a monster that either cannot possibly exist or is beyond the realm of humankind, and therefore we are not responsible for that monster. Fictional monsters under the bed can be easier to deal with than the idea that they are really among us. For example, Frankenstein's monster can be seen as a metaphor for man's thirst for knowledge and pushing the boundaries of science. No limits or thought for the consequences. Relevant when written in 1818 by Mary Shelley at the onset of the Industrial Revolution, but also relevant since the creation of the atom bomb, the pushing of the boundaries in medicine, physics, exploration, and currently fears involving the dangers of artificial intelligence. The Cold War, the nuclear threat from the 1930s, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, factored in many science fiction and horror stories. Mutants and monsters such as Godzilla, a result of the nuclear threat created by mankind. Even human monsters such as Michael Myers in Halloween and returning killers such as Freddy Krueger in Nightmare on Elm Street are placed in the category of the other. Our revulsion and fascination with serial killers can stem from our complete lack of understanding and horror at how humans can both commit and enjoy performing such atrocities. In those early serial killer movies, masks or disfigurement were often used to dissociate the killer from the rest of society. More movies since have shown the true horror of the killer looking like just everyone else. Perhaps good looking, perhaps charming, or even just looking like a neighbour or a co-worker. An ordinary face on an extraordinary evil human being can elevate the horror even further when it reinforces that what we see as the other is living among us, perhaps even next door. Although we sit here in the 21st century, there is still a belief and fascination for the paranormal, its research, its history, and its continued investigation. I will be covering this in more depth over the series. We are enthralled by the other, the unknown, whether it is the monster under the bed, the aliens in our skies, or the ghosts in our presence. We also have a history of thousands of years of looking for what happens after we die. This will be a key focus of the next 2 episodes, which looks at the questions of life after death by the Victorians and those who charge money and faked contact with the dead in this time. Fakery is not new to the paranormal. Playing out on wishes for real evidence, for answers, and even need to be thrilled and even afraid is nothing new. This is my look at the journey into the history of the debunkers.